There's a reason this story was almost buried, hidden beneath layers of time, tradition, and misunderstanding. The Book of Daniel is not just a biblical tale, it's a prophetic thriller, a divine screenplay so precise, so bold it predicted global empires, revealed future messiahs, and exposed the spiritual codes that still shape our world today. And yet, most people have no idea what's really written in it. If you think you've heard it all, think again. This isn't your typical Sunday school recap. This is the unreleased version, the part that rarely makes it to pulpits or popular commentary. The Book of Daniel holds secrets that Hollywood couldn't script better, and revelations that challenge even the most skeptical minds. Political powers, angelic warfare, apocalyptic visions, it's all here. And the craziest part? Much of it has already happened. And the rest may be unfolding right now. But why isn't this common knowledge? Why is a book that accurately predicted the rise and fall of nations treated like ancient fiction instead of a spiritual blueprint? Simple. Because truth disrupts. And Daniel's truth doesn't just disrupt, it shocks. If you've ever wondered whether prophecy is real, whether history has a divine pattern, or whether your life is part of something far greater than what you see, this video will change everything. But be warned, once you see it, you can't unsee it. It all begins in a time of chaos, the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign. Babylon invades Jerusalem with fury, and the sacred city is conquered. Among the captives is a young man named Daniel. This wasn't just a military conquest. It was an assault on identity, faith, and culture. And here lies one of the great mysteries revealed. How does one remain whole when the world tries to break them apart? Daniel and other noble youths are brought to the Babylonian court. Their names are changed, their traditions dismissed. It wasn't just domination, it was erasure. Have you ever felt that? Like the system is pushing you to be someone you're not? That's where many lose themselves. But Daniel chose silent resistance. He knew who he was. In the Book of Daniel, there's a strength that doesn't come with a sword, but with wisdom. Daniel was that kind of warrior. While others conformed, he stood firm in his roots. Imagine walking into a toxic environment yet guarding your peace. Daniel mastered this. And we can too. It's not about shouting, but about carrying the sacred. Within, Babylon didn't want mere subjects. It wanted clones. Youth trained to serve the king, but spiritually disconnected. How many today lose themselves trying to fit into spaces that demand the death of their essence? This ancient story still speaks today. Whether at work, online, or even among friends, the pressure to mold is real. Curiously, even in captivity, Daniel didn't rebel with force. He adapted but never compromised. That's wisdom. Not always fighting the system, but being light within it. Today, staying honest can be the biggest act of rebellion. And if you feel like you need to change your name to be accepted, maybe you're in the wrong place. A precious lesson here. No matter where you are or what's been done to you, you still choose how to respond. Daniel didn't choose captivity, but he chose what to do with it. That's the key many miss: inner freedom. When everything around you collapses, what you hold within defines who you are. The Bible wastes no words. And the Book of Daniel begins by showing us that even in exile, God is writing a story. This breaks the idea that blessing only comes in peace. Sometimes the blessing hides within the chaos. That's where identity is forged. Daniel became a symbol, but he started as a prisoner. Now think about it. What do you do when everything that gave you stability is stripped away? Name, home, routine, culture? That's when faith kicks in. And not surface-level faith, but the kind that anchors the soul in the dark. Daniel was far from the temple, but God's presence wasn't far from him. That changes everything. In today's world, being like Daniel is a rare calling. When algorithms shape what we think, and social media demands characters instead of people, staying whole has become revolutionary. And you? In what areas of life are you being challenged to keep your essence alive under pressure? Want a practical way to stay grounded like Daniel? Start journaling. Write down who you are, your values, your beliefs. The world will try to convince you otherwise. Writing, like the Book of Daniel, is an act of resistance. Another powerful practice: daily reading of Proverbs and Psalms, wisdom and refuge, side by side. Daniel was placed in a training center, but he understood what many miss. Even enemy territory can be a spiritual classroom. Every detail in Babylon became a backdrop for faith to bloom. So when you feel out of place, ask, what can I learn here? Sometimes, purpose comes dressed as captivity. And so, we begin to see that events are not random. Daniel's exile was the stage for a bigger plan. What looked like an ending was just the first act. But as we'll see next, God's faithfulness is revealed in the smallest choices, even in what's placed on the dinner plate. When Daniel and his friends arrived in Babylon, they faced more than a new language or strange customs. They were offered the king's food, a symbol of luxury and assimilation. But instead of indulging, they made a quiet yet bold request. Just vegetables and water, please. To many, that might seem small, but in that decision lay the heartbeat of their faith, a deep stand against spiritual defilement. In the book of Daniel, food becomes more than nutrition. It becomes a test. In a world that often celebrates conformity, Daniel and his companions show that resisting doesn't always come with loud protest. Sometimes it's found in a plate of greens. Mysteries revealed again. Integrity often shows up in the ordinary. Would you say no to what everyone else is enjoying, just to stay true to your soul? There's something deeply practical about this moment. It speaks to choices we face daily, what we consume, watch, read, and allow into our hearts. When the world serves you its version of a feast, filled with ego, distraction, and vanity, will you choose discipline? Maybe it's saying no to certain apps, certain shows, or conversations that leave you spiritually hollow. The steward feared the king's wrath. What if Daniel's health declined, but divine wisdom showed up wrapped in courage? Test us for 10 days, Daniel said. Imagine having that kind of calm confidence in your convictions. 10 days passed. They looked stronger, healthier, more radiant. Their stand wasn't just spiritual, it was visible. And that's what unshakable faith does. It transforms us from the inside out. Faithfulness doesn't mean absence of pressure. It means choosing what's right even when it's uncomfortable. Many today feel the same pressure Daniel felt, to fit in, to not make things awkward. But sometimes, spiritual power is hidden in social discomfort. Are you willing to be that weird one if it means staying aligned with your higher calling? The king's delicacies weren't just physical. They symbolized Babylon's attempt to reprogram identity. And isn't that what culture still does? It feeds you ideas about success, beauty, and status, hoping you'll forget who you truly are. But Daniel knew, eating like Babylon would slowly make him think like Babylon, and that was a cost he wasn't willing to pay. In a society obsessed with instant gratification, Daniel's choice screams patience and principle. He didn't just resist food, he resisted becoming someone else. If you've ever felt tempted to dilute your values just to get ahead or be accepted, Daniel's stand reminds you. Long-term favor is worth more than short-term approval. You don't need a palace to apply this. You can start with small, sacred choices. Maybe you set aside time each morning for quiet reflection, prayer, or journaling, before the noise of the world kicks in. Or perhaps you fast from digital distractions once a week. These little acts, though unnoticed by the crowd, shape the soul. This story also whispers something powerful. God honors discipline. He doesn't ignore the sacrifices you make to stay spiritually clean, that quiet no to temptation, that invisible boundary you draw. Heaven sees it. The book of Daniel confirms. God is not distant in your daily decisions. He's right there, strengthening your resolve. As Daniel and his friends excelled, they didn't just gain favor, they gained clarity. Their minds were sharp, their wisdom tenfold. When you honor your spiritual values, your insight increases. Have you noticed how hard it is to think clearly when your conscience is heavy? But when you walk in integrity, discernment flows like fresh water. The culture tried to reshape them, but they reshaped the culture instead. And it started with a meal. What you allow into your life determines the direction of your life. That's why it matters. Your choices today are the seeds of your legacy tomorrow. This wasn't about vegetables. It was about vision. And this small, faithful act sets the stage for something bigger. A moment where dreams, symbols, and empires collide. A moment where Daniel is called upon, not for his appearance, but for his divine insight. The king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, had a dream that shook him to the core. A vision so intense, it left him restless and afraid. None of his wise men could interpret it. That's when Daniel steps onto the stage, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty rooted in divine connection. In a kingdom filled with illusions, Daniel offered clarity. The book of Daniel shows that true insight doesn't come from intellect alone. It comes from revelation. The dream itself was strange. A colossal statue made of various metals, each representing a different kingdom. Gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. Daniel explains it with calm authority. This isn't just about empires, it's about eternity. One stone, not made by human hands, crushes the statue. God's kingdom will rise, and unlike the others, it will never fall. One of the great mysteries revealed is this: earthly power has an expiration date. Daniel wasn't just interpreting dreams, he was revealing a divine pattern. The transitions of empires weren't accidents. They were orchestrated. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Each had their moment, and each fell. What do we learn from that? That chasing status or dominance is like building on sand. Only what's aligned with eternity stands. Imagine being Daniel in that moment. Young, foreign, and surrounded by men much older, more established. Yet because he honored God privately, he was elevated publicly. That's how favor works. When you seek divine wisdom in the quiet, God places you in rooms where your voice carries weight. People spend years trying to be seen. Daniel teaches us, be faithful, and the right moment will find you. The book of Daniel reminds us that prophetic dreams aren't reserved for a chosen few. God still speaks through visions, impressions, even that persistent feeling you can't shake. But you've got to make room for it. Too much noise and you miss the whisper. Want clarity? Start by creating space. Unplug, pray, journal, walk in silence. The signal is always there. We just need to tune in. Nebuchadnezzar's reaction is powerful. A king bows before a captive. That reversal says everything. When truth is revealed, even the proud are humbled. And this is what makes Daniel so timeless. His authority wasn't rooted in title, but in truth. In a world obsessed with credentials, God elevates the faithful. Today's statues may not be made of metal, but they're just as present. Careers, image, followers, wealth. We're all tempted to build something impressive. But Daniel's vision warns us, if it's not anchored in God's design, it won't last. So what are you building? And more importantly, why? Daniel could have taken credit. He could have used the spotlight for himself. But instead, he points everything back to God. That's rare, and that's powerful. When favor finds you, remember who sent it. In moments of recognition, humility is what sustains the blessing. Your gifts open doors, but your heart determines if you'll stay. There's also a lesson here about preparation. Daniel didn't start interpreting dreams overnight. He had years of prayer, discipline, and seeking. So when the opportunity came, he was ready. Don't despise the quiet seasons. They're training ground. The book of Daniel proves that destiny honors those who are prepared. This part of Daniel's story also speaks to spiritual authority. Not everyone can walk into a palace and bring heaven's message, but Daniel could. Why? Because he didn't compromise his convictions for comfort. The world doesn't need louder voices, it needs deeper ones. Voices rooted in truth, not trends. And so, Daniel rises, not through politics or manipulation, but through prophetic insight. That kind of elevation still exists today. When you seek first the kingdom, everything else aligns. Not instantly, not without challenge, but with purpose. Daniel wasn't trying to rise. He was trying to be faithful. The rise was a result. But just as Daniel begins to gain influence, another challenge brews. This time, not for him, but for his friends. Golden statue, a command to bow, and a furnace burning hot with consequence. When King Nebuchadnezzar built a golden statue and commanded everyone to bow, it wasn't just a political order. It was a spiritual ultimatum. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this moment was crystal clear. Bow and survive, or stand and burn. The book of Daniel makes one thing certain. Real faith doesn't negotiate with fear, and this was about to become one of the most breathtaking mysteries revealed. The pressure was immense. The furnace roared behind them. The crowd bowed without hesitation. Yet these three stood tall, not in defiance, but in devotion. Their words to the king echoed through history. Even if our God does not rescue us, we still won't bow. That's not arrogance. That's anchored faith. Faith that's not based on outcomes but on allegiance. Think about it. How many times have we bowed to avoid conflict, rejection, or discomfort? Today's statues might look different, but they're just as real. Approval from others, the fear of missing out, the need to belong. Every day we're asked to bow. The Book of Daniel challenges us to ask, what are we compromising just to be comfortable? The furnace was heated 7 times hotter. That's how fear works. It escalates when you resist. And still, they didn't flinch. This is courage in its purest form. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to surrender to it. Their stand wasn't just about them. It was a statement to generations. Some fires are worth walking through. And then, the miracle. As they were thrown into the flames, something astonishing happened. A 4th figure appeared, radiant, divine. Even Nebuchadnezzar saw it. Didn't we throw 3 men in? I see 4. The flames didn't burn them. Not even a hair was singed. Only the ropes that bound them were gone. That's one of the mysteries revealed. Sometimes, fire doesn't destroy. It sets you free. This story reminds us that God doesn't always prevent the fire, but He always joins us in it. His presence isn't limited to palaces or peaceful moments. It shows up in the heat, in the trial, in the pressure. If you're walking through something now, don't just pray to escape it. Ask to meet Him in it. Nebuchadnezzar's reaction was one of shock and awe. He called them out, honored them, and made a decree praising their God. Funny how those who tried to cancel your faith end up becoming its biggest promoters. The Book of Daniel proves this. When your faith is unshakable, even your enemies testify. Notice that God didn't stop the king from building the statue. He didn't stop the furnace from being lit. But He turned the situation around in such a way that His glory couldn't be denied. That's divine strategy. What the enemy meant for destruction, heaven used for declaration. God doesn't just rescue. He redefines the narrative. Have you ever walked through a season that felt like fire, loss, betrayal, financial pressure, sickness? These men show us it's not just about surviving the flames, it's about who walks with you through them. And if you come out still worshiping, still standing, still trusting, that's the real miracle. Practical example, the next time life feels like it's turning up the heat, pause and declare, even if I don't see the outcome, I will not bow. Write it down, stick it on your mirror, let it anchor your decisions, because your fire might not come with flames, but it will come with choices. And in those moments, your resolve is your witness. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a national testimony. An entire kingdom saw that there is a God who delivers. And where did it begin? With 3 friends who decided that worship was worth the risk. The Book of Daniel constantly reminds us, bold faith can change atmospheres, shift cultures, and awaken kings. But just when Nebuchadnezzar seems transformed, another twist appears. This time, the spotlight turns inward, toward his own heart. Pride brews beneath the surface, preparing the way for a humbling like no other. Just when it seemed like King Nebuchadnezzar had recognized the greatness of God, pride crept back in. Quiet, subtle, but deadly. He walked through his palace, admiring its grandeur, and said, "Is this not the great Babylon I have built?" That single moment, a whisper of ego, triggered a divine interruption. In the Book of Daniel, pride is never just a personal flaw. It's a spiritual blindfold. And this chapter reveals one of the mysteries revealed. Unchecked pride always leads to a fall. As those words left his mouth, a voice from heaven declared his fate. He would be driven from his kingdom, live like a beast, eat grass like an ox. It sounds extreme, but it's a mirror. How often do we forget the source of our success and start believing it's all our doing? That job promotion, that dream home, that platform. It's so easy to credit ourselves. But pride builds thrones on shaky ground. Nebuchadnezzar's fall was immediate. One moment, he's king. The next, he's crawling through fields, his mind clouded, his dignity gone. It wasn't punishment, it was purification. God didn't want to destroy him, he wanted to realign him. And sometimes, divine love looks like losing everything to rediscover what truly matters. The Book of Daniel teaches that losing the crown might be the beginning of finding clarity. This isn't just a royal tale, it's deeply human. Who among us hasn't tasted a little too much success and started thinking we're in control? That our strategies, our hustle, our talent are what sustain us? Nebuchadnezzar shows what happens when we forget the one who gave us breath. It's not wrong to build, just dangerous to believe we did it alone. Interestingly, even in his madness, God preserved him. That's mercy. He wasn't killed or overthrown. He was held in a space of learning, of breaking, of becoming. Sometimes your most painful season is not abandonment, it's an intentional pause, a holy timeout. And when you're in it, remember, pride isolates, but humility restores. After 7 years, yes, 7, his sanity returned. And what did Nebuchadnezzar do first? He looked up. That simple gesture carried spiritual weight. The moment he lifted his eyes, he lifted his heart. That's how restoration begins. When you're low, look high. Reconnection with heaven begins, with realignment of vision. He praised the Most High, acknowledging God's eternal rule, not out of fear, but out of revelation. Pride had been stripped away, and in its place came perspective. He saw clearly, kings come and go, but God's kingdom stands forever. That's not just theology, it's liberation. When you realize you're not the center, you finally breathe free. If you're navigating success right now, leading, creating, building, this chapter is a caution and a compass. Celebrate what you've achieved, yes. But never let your eyes stay only on what your hands have made. Look beyond. Stay grounded. Because every platform can become a pedestal if you lose sight of who placed you there. The Book of Daniel reminds us, true authority is not taken, it's entrusted. And what's entrusted must be held with reverence. Pride wants you to grip it tighter. Humility teaches you to hold it with open hands. That's how you keep power from becoming poison. One powerful practice? Regularly audit your heart. Ask yourself, where have I become self-reliant? What am I clinging to that's feeding my ego instead of my spirit? Write it down. Pray over it. Talk it out with someone wise. Pride grows in silence, but humility grows in light. Nebuchadnezzar's transformation wasn't private. He wrote it down, declared it, shared it publicly. That's another key. Testimony. When God humbles you, don't hide it, share it. Let others see the journey. Your story might be the roadmap for someone else's rescue. The fall didn't define him. The return did. But just as Nebuchadnezzar finds peace, the next chapter opens with a very different king. A man who didn't learn from the past and whose pride would be confronted in a terrifying, unforgettable way. The banquet was extravagant. Gold cups from the temple, wine flowing, music echoing through Babylon's palace. King Belshazzar sat high on his throne, mocking the sacred. In his arrogance, he toasted false gods with holy vessels. The Book of Daniel takes a sharp turn here. What seemed like a party became a moment of judgment. And then it happened. A mysterious hand appeared and wrote on the wall. No one could read it. But the message was clear. Divine boundaries had been crossed. This scene is unforgettable. Imagine the candles flickering, the music halting, and the color draining from the king's face. The laughter stops. The room freezes. It's as if time itself paused to deliver a warning. The words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin, etched into plaster, eternal and unshakable. These were not just words. They were verdicts. The Book of Daniel doesn't soften the blow. The writing was not metaphorical. It was final. Belshazzar panicked. He called every wise man in Babylon, but none could interpret the writing. Power, once loud and boastful, now trembled in silence. That's the thing about pride. It feels invincible until truth shows up. And truth has a way of humbling even the most powerful. One of the mysteries revealed is this. When God writes, it cannot be erased. Then came Daniel, older now, seasoned, yet still burning with divine insight. They brought him in, promising riches and status. But Daniel wasn't impressed. He reminded Belshazzar of what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, how pride led to his fall and humility to his restoration. Daniel pulled no punches. You knew all this, yet you did not humble yourself. It's a sobering truth. Knowing isn't enough. Belshazzar had the story, the legacy, the example, but he didn't learn. Today, many of us have access to wisdom, sermons, scripture, podcasts. But access doesn't equal transformation. What we do with what we know is what changes our story. And Belshazzar chose ignorance cloaked in indulgence. Daniel read the writing. Mene, God has numbered your days. Tekel, you've been weighed and found lacking. Parson, your kingdom is divided. 3 words that carried eternity in their syllables. And just like that, the party became a prophecy. The book of Daniel proves that even the mightiest are subject to God's timetable. The king honored Daniel with robes and gold chains, but it was too late. That very night, Babylon fell. The Medes and Persians took over, just as foretold. There was no war cry, no final speech, just a quiet, divine shift of power. This isn't just about empires. It's about the brevity of unchecked ego. This chapter teaches us to live with awareness, to understand that actions have consequences, and disrespecting the sacred invites reckoning. Have you ever felt like there was a writing on the wall moment in your life? A sign you were off track? Don't ignore those whispers. They're invitations to course correct before it's too late. We all have sacred things, relationships, dreams, values, our faith. When we start treating them casually, as Belshazzar did with the temple vessels, we step into dangerous territory. God doesn't always intervene with handwriting, but he does speak through conviction, redirection, and wise counsel. Are you listening? This chapter also speaks to spiritual discernment. In a room full of experts, only Daniel had eyes to see and ears to hear. Today, in a world full of opinions and noise, clarity comes to those who've spent time in silence with God. If you want to understand what's really happening around you, invest in intimacy with the divine. Belshazzar's story is a warning wrapped in wonder. It shows us that the end doesn't always come with thunder. It can arrive quietly, written on a wall. But Daniel's presence reminds us that even in judgment, God leaves space for truth. The question is, will we recognize it in time? As Babylon falls and the kingdom changes hands, the spotlight turns once again to Daniel, now under a new ruler, facing a challenge far more personal, far more dangerous. Under King Darius, Daniel had risen to a position of influence and trust. His integrity was unmatched and his excellence undeniable. But success often attracts jealousy. The other officials, unable to find any fault in Daniel, devised a trap, not against his work, but against his worship. The book of Daniel takes us into a new kind of battlefield, one where prayer becomes a crime. And here lies one of the mysteries revealed. When faith is tested, so is loyalty. They manipulated the king into signing a decree. No prayer to any god or man except Darius for 30 days. The punishment? A night with lions. Daniel knew the decree. He could have closed his windows. He could have prayed in silence, but he didn't. He went home, knelt as always, and prayed with the windows wide open. Why? Because true faith doesn't hide. It stands. Imagine the courage in that moment. Daniel wasn't being dramatic. He was being devoted. He wasn't looking for attention. He was refusing to compromise. How many times do we silence our convictions to blend in? Daniel chose visibility over safety, not to provoke, but to proclaim. His message? I serve a God who's worth the risk. When the officials caught him praying, they ran to the king. Darius was heartbroken. He respected Daniel and tried all day to find a loophole. But the law couldn't be undone. And so, with a heavy heart, he ordered Daniel to the lion's den. But even as Daniel was lowered into darkness, the king whispered words of hope. May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. The den was sealed. The night was long. Darius couldn't sleep. He refused food, entertainment, everything. That's the power of a righteous witness. It even disturbs the conscience of kings. At dawn, he ran to the den and called out. And, from the shadows came Daniel's voice, calm and whole. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. Not a scratch on him, not a bruise, because he was innocent before God and man. That's not just divine protection. It's divine vindication. The book of Daniel shows us that God doesn't just deliver. He makes a statement through it. When you stand for him, he stands with you. Think about your own lion's dens. Those situations that feel threatening, impossible, soul-crushing. Maybe it's a toxic job, a strained relationship, or an overwhelming decision. Daniel's story whispers, you're not alone in that space. Faith doesn't guarantee absence of trials, it guarantees presence in them. Darius was transformed. He issued a new decree, one that honored Daniel's God. Imagine that. Laws changed, culture shifted, because one man dared to keep praying. Mysteries revealed. Private devotion can lead to public revival. Don't underestimate the power of a kneeling believer. The lions weren't removed. The danger wasn't canceled. But Daniel's God didn't flinch. And neither did Daniel. That's the kind of unshakable trust that transforms not just outcomes, but hearts. And this story calls us higher. Not just to survive, but to shine. In our darkest places, want to live like Daniel? Cultivate consistency. Daniel didn't start praying when trouble came. He'd been doing it all along. Build habits of faith now so when pressure comes, you don't have to scramble. You just continue. Faith isn't a reaction, it's a rhythm. Daniel walked out of that den not just alive, but elevated. And as we'll soon discover, his greatest revelations weren't behind him, they were just ahead. Visions of beasts, kingdoms, and eternity awaited. As Daniel aged, his influence expanded. But so did his spiritual encounters. One night, he received a vision that shook him to the core. 4 great beasts emerged from the sea, each more terrifying than the last. These weren't just monsters. They were metaphors, empires, systems, powers that would rise and fall. The book of Daniel enters a realm of deep prophecy here. And among the mysteries revealed, one truth stands out. Behind earthly chaos lies a divine pattern. Each beast had its own identity, symbolizing kingdoms both ancient and future. A lion with wings, a bear raised on one side, a leopard with 4 heads, and a 4th beast, so dreadful it defied categories. Daniel wasn't just watching history unfold. He was seeing spiritual architecture, the blueprint behind political power, and it left him trembling. But then, the scene shifted. Thrones were set in place. The Ancient of Days appeared, radiant and sovereign. Fire flowed from his throne, and the court sat in judgment. It's here we learn something crucial. No matter how fearsome the beast, God remains seated. The book of Daniel reminds us that God doesn't panic when evil looks loud. He presides. In the middle of the vision, Daniel sees one, like a son of man, approaching the Ancient of Days. He is given authority, glory, and a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Sound familiar? It's a prophetic glimpse of Christ, wrapped in symbol, blazing with purpose. This wasn't just hope, it was promise. A divine kingdom was on its way. Daniel's visions weren't abstract. They were emotionally intense. He was disturbed, physically affected, and overwhelmed. Ever felt that way when trying to understand God's plans for your life? You're not alone. Sometimes revelation comes with weight, but as the book of Daniel teaches, even the heaviest visions carry hope. There's something humbling about these apocalyptic scenes. They remind us that we're part of a much bigger narrative. While we stress over daily routines, heaven is watching timelines of kingdoms and eternal destinies. Yet, in all of it, God still speaks to individuals. Daniel wasn't just a prophet, he was a person, and God entrusted him with layers of eternity. Want to understand prophecy better? Start by praying for discernment, then study with intention. Books like Revelation, Ezekiel, and of course, the book of Daniel, are full of symbolic truth. Pair that with historical context and spiritual humility. Don't rush. Let the vision speak slowly. The beasts weren't random. They revealed how earthly power corrupts and consumes, but they also showed that judgment would come. Every roar, every horn, every blasphemous act, none of it escaped God's attention. That's reassuring when we look at today's headlines. Injustice might rise, but it will never reign forever. This chapter whispers a hard but necessary truth. Not all battles are physical. Some of the fiercest wars are fought in the invisible realm. Ideologies, principalities, spiritual forces. Daniel saw them not as fantasy, but as reality. And today, our discernment is needed more than ever. The vision closed, but Daniel didn't bounce back quickly. He was sick for days, trying to process it all. That's what happens when heaven downloads information that doesn't fit in earthly containers. If you've ever had moments where your spirit feels heavy after prayer or reflection, it might be because you touched something holy. And as Daniel regains strength, another revelation awaits. This time, it won't just be about beasts or kingdoms. It will be about time itself, weeks, timelines, and the coming of the Anointed One. In one of the most profound moments of the book of Daniel, the angel Gabriel appears with a revelation that transcends Daniel's own lifetime. 70 weeks are decreed, not of calendar days, but prophetic time. A divine timeline is being unveiled. And here we encounter one of the greatest mysteries revealed. History is not random. It's written. Gabriel explains that the 70 weeks are marked for the people of Israel and the holy city, with a clear purpose: to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness. This isn't just about events, it's about redemption, about restoration. God's clock was ticking, and Daniel got a front row seat. The countdown begins with the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, which would be followed by 7 weeks, then 62 more, until the arrival of the Anointed One, the Messiah. Daniel doesn't receive vague ideas. He receives precision. Imagine being shown not just the future, but its divine choreography. The book of Daniel isn't predicting, it's proclaiming. Then comes a twist. The Messiah will be cut off, seemingly without justice. This alone is staggering. Centuries before Jesus walked the earth, Daniel saw the shadow of the cross. The prophecy predicted both promise and pain, glory and grief. It reminds us that God's plans include both breakthrough and brokenness. And after the Messiah's rejection, desolation follows. A ruler arises, a covenant is made, and then broken. The temple is desecrated. The pattern echoes throughout time. Hope, betrayal, judgment. But within that cycle lies the thread of salvation. Daniel is seeing more than nations. He's seeing the gospel in codes and numbers. This chapter challenges us to think differently about time. We count hours, days, months. But God measures moments by purpose, 70 weeks, not arbitrary, not symbolic fluff, but a sacred countdown toward redemption. And if you're feeling like time is slipping or wasted, remember, divine timing is always exact. Daniel doesn't just receive the vision. He responds with prayer, fasting, and repentance. That's a key many overlook. Revelation without response is just information. But Daniel lets the prophecy move him. If God showed you a glimpse of the future, how would you prepare today? Want a practical step? Dive deeper into prophecy. Study this chapter alongside Nehemiah, Ezra, and the Gospels. Trace the timeline yourself. It's a spiritual treasure hunt, and every discovery draws you closer to the heart of God. The book of Daniel isn't just for scholars, it's for seekers. Also, pay attention to Gabriel's role. An archangel wasn't sent for casual conversation. He brought clarity, direction, urgency. And this reminds us, heaven responds to hunger. Daniel wasn't just curious, he was committed. He sought truth with fasting, with tears, with yearning. That kind of pursuit still attracts heaven's messengers. This vision reminds us that the Messiah was always part of the plan, not a backup, not a reaction, but the center. Jesus didn't appear to fix history, he came to fulfill it. And Daniel's prophecy proves that heaven's script was written long before the stage was set. As Gabriel's message closes, Daniel is left with more than numbers. He's left with awe, with reverence, with hope wrapped in holy mystery. And just when you think the revelations are complete, another scene unfolds. One that stretches not only across time, but eternity. Throughout the book of Daniel, kingdoms have risen and fallen, Babylon, Persia, and others looming on the horizon. Yet through it all, one truth echoes louder than empires. God's kingdom is unshakable. This isn't a poetic thought, it's a spiritual reality. And among the final mysteries revealed, perhaps the most profound is this: no throne on earth can outlast the sovereignty of heaven. Daniel had witnessed kings drunk on power and humbled by truth. He saw dreams shape destinies and divine intervention rewrite laws. Still, what stands out most is not the spectacle, it's the steadiness. While human rule shifted like sand, God remained the rock. And that's a comfort we need in a world that feels increasingly unstable. Today, rulers come and go. Systems rise and collapse. Trends dominate, then vanish. But God's authority isn't up for election. His kingdom doesn't waver with opinion polls. If you've ever felt disoriented by the chaos of the world, the Book of Daniel offers this anchor. God is still in charge. Always has been. Always will be. Daniel's life proves that serving in a broken system doesn't require becoming broken yourself. He worked under pagan kings, yet never bowed to their gods. That's the power of sovereignty. It secures your identity, even in hostile territory. You don't need to control everything when you know who does. And that changes how you walk, talk, and lead. Want to live under divine sovereignty? Start with surrender. True authority flows through submission. Daniel wasn't trying to dominate, he was devoted. He didn't push for power, he positioned himself in prayer. Sovereignty isn't about control, it's about trust. And when you truly trust God's reign, anxiety begins to lose its grip. The key Book of Daniel reminds us that history is not a cycle of randomness, it's a story. A divine drama with a beginning, middle, and victorious end. And you're part of it. That alone should shift how you see your life. You're not lost in the crowd. You were chosen for this chapter. Need a practical anchor? Recite daily affirmations of God's rule. Declare verses like Psalm 103:19. The Lord has established his throne in heaven, and his kingdom rules over all. Speak them aloud. Write them on sticky notes. Let truth shape your atmosphere. The world may roar, but your soul can rest. Daniel's final visions stretched far beyond his lifetime. They revealed wars, rulers, resurrections. But through every detail, the message remained. God's kingdom stands forever. That's not fantasy. It's foundation. If you're going to build something in this life, let it be on that rock. This truth also redefines success. It's not about recognition, it's about alignment. Daniel didn't chase fame, yet his name endured. He didn't seek position, yet God exalted him. Sovereignty rearranges the reward system. What heaven values often looks invisible on earth, but it echoes in eternity. There's a subtle beauty in the way Daniel's story ends. He isn't glorified by men, he's honored by God. Go your way until the end, he's told. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise. It's a whisper of resurrection, a promise of reward. The sovereign king doesn't forget his servants. And so, as empires fade and cultures shift, the last word belongs to God. The Book of Daniel closes not with a period, but with an invitation to trust deeper, to stand firmer, and to see beyond what's temporary into what's eternal. After walking through empires, dreams, beasts, fire, and prophecy, one question echoes louder than ever. What will you do with this knowledge? Because now, you can't say you didn't know. You've just seen how the Book of Daniel doesn't just speak of the past. It speaks directly to your present and your future. Are you living as if your days were numbered? Are your choices aligned with something eternal? Or are you just going with the flow of the latest kingdom, trend, or distraction? Daniel didn't blend in. He stood out, not for fame, but for faith. And now, it's your turn. Where do you need to stand? What do you need to let go of? What spiritual fire is God calling you to walk through without fear? This isn't about religion. It's about reality. A reality where kingdoms rise and fall, but truth always survives. And now that you've seen behind the curtain, it's time to start living with clarity, purpose, and boldness. So here's your next step. Apply what you've learned. Revisit the chapters. Rethink your habits. Reignite your prayers. And most of all, respond, because heaven is still writing, and your name can be part of the next chapter. If this message stirred something in you, let me know in the comments. What part hit you the hardest? What are you going to do differently from now on? And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay connected, because there's so much more for us to uncover together.